All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. My name is Molly Ross. I'm the Vice President of Operations here at the Technology Association of Iowa. And I'm super excited today for the first in our DEI Spotlight series. This is a series of conversations hosted by TAI's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. They're working on highlighting stories, success stories, and hosting conversations of DEI initiatives across the state, hoping that we can all work together to improve the diversity here in our state and the successes of those involved. So thank you to our committee. I know there are a number of you signed on here today. In just a moment, I'm going to turn the conversation over. But before I do, again, thank you everyone for jumping on. We do hope to make this a conversation. So please feel free to ask questions, turn your camera on, please stay on mute while you're not talking, but we would love for you to engage. You can also submit questions and conversation in the chat. We're happy to we'll continue to watch that throughout the conversation. And with that, I am going to turn the conversation over to our moderator for today, Dr. Jennifer Murphy, Learning and Development Manager at Bergen KDV.
Hello, everyone. Super glad that you all decided to come and share your lunch with us today. And hopefully we feed your brains a little bit of a cornball. Please excuse me or go with it. But this is our first DEI Spotlight series, and I am thrilled to be offering this. We went back and forth on whether to do it virtual or in person. And I'll be honest, that conversation wasn't very long because we really do want to be able to reach people across the state and not make you have to drive anywhere from 5 minutes to 5 hours to get to one of these. So we love that you're here with us today. And I really do encourage you to share, any feedback that you might have with us about these sessions, because we're going to, try these and see how they go, and then hopefully do a lot more of them as time goes on. So we today are so lucky to have Martina Schubert and Samantha Dalby with us to talk about women in technology. And so as Molly shared, as we go through this, please put your questions or your comments in the chat, because we do want this to be interactive. We've got, a couple of really great panelists with us. Martina is the Chief Technology Officer at Lender Close, and Samantha is Director of K-12 Education at NewBoCo. And as you think about that, we've got Samantha helping people at the very early beginning seed planting start of their career, and Martina's sitting here waiting for them to come. So we've got, this great, I think, gamut of experience to talk about, but we also know that you all have experiences. And so we want to draw on that collective experience and really work collaboratively across the field of technology in Iowa. So again, use that chat. And if you've got ideas for topics or speakers in the future, share those with us. So I want to thank you both for being here today, Martina and Samantha. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can see you all better. There we go. And I wanted to start really by letting you tell us a little bit about you in the framework of this question. Who turned you on to this field? Who got your heart pounding about working in technology? And how can we create more of that? So as you share that story with us, if you kind of give us a little of your history and background and what got you to where you are today, that'd be great. Martina, you want to start us off?
Yes, thank you for that. Well, this goes back a long time, 30 plus years, I'll say. I don't have to age myself any more than I already am. And I was taking all through high school. I didn't try very hard. I have two parents who are factory workers. So if you got C's at our house, everything was like, yay, you're fine. And you didn't get bothered. And so it was pretty easy to get B's and not do very much for me. So I just kind of did that. So I got to my senior year and took a computer class, a beginning computer class. And I got to the end of that semester and I had signed up for the advanced class because I thought, oh, this is kind of fun. And the teacher pulled me aside and said, I don't think you should take the advanced class. I don't think you can do it. And that just really pissed me off because I'm kind of competitive. And I thought, I'm going to show you and I'm going to take that class and I'm going to get an A. So it was probably one of the first classes that I absolutely tried in high school, and ended up getting an A. And I went to the end of that, and I was planning to go to DMAC for something, because that's really what my parents could afford when I was that age. And got to thinking about, I could probably, maybe I want to do this for my job. And so I went to DMAC for my first degree in computer programming, and that started as a developer. And now years and years and years later, I'm a CTO.
I
So that's
love
how I
it.
got here. So it was really education that got me here. A teacher, especially. My husband's a teacher. He teaches industrial tech at Valley. And one of the things that he really resonates with, especially now that I've met him, years later, is just how impactful those kind of teachers can be. And even if it would have been somebody that didn't feel that way like me, I am competitive, and that kind of got me driven to go for it. But other people would have been shut down and would have thought, oh, you're right, I can't do it, right?
Yeah.
So I just always keep that in mind.
Yeah, I love that. And that is such a great little tag into what Samantha does. So Samantha.
Yeah, so my journey also started with a teacher in high school. I had a math teacher say, "You're really good at math and science. You should look into engineering." And I'm like, why would I ever want to drive a train? Because I had no engineers that I was familiar with. What the heck is engineering? And so I learned what engineering was, and started kind of doing some job shadowing with people. My teachers were really helpful in connecting me with people in the community, to see what you could do in engineering. And it was actually a summer program at Iowa State between my junior and senior year, where you got to go and stay on campus for several days. And the College of Engineering took you around to all of the different departments, the types of engineering. And high school students on a college campus, we stayed up late and no partying. But the only one that I was really engaged in was the computer engineering program, because we just had a goal of trying to make a robot go straight, which sounds simple, but in reality, it takes a lot of work, because there's motors and there's different power going to the motors. And so I found it challenging for the first time. Again, like school was, it was just kind of a game for me to see how little I could do to get A's. And so I went into this program and really had no background. My school didn't have any computer science opportunities. We had keyboarding and like Apple Works or whatever it was at the time type stuff. And so I went in, and that was my first awakening, where people told me I couldn't do things because of who I was. And we had about 300 students incoming into computer engineering that year. And I'll round up and say there were about 20 girls out of that. I knew 11 of them. And by end of first semester, we were down to 7 that I knew, just because it was not super welcoming. And it wasn't like specific things. It was people assuming that I was there for business, or assuming that I was there to find a husband, or things like that. That just, I don't know, it's yucky. And so I did succeed, and I graduated and all of that, and became a software engineer. Again, like thought the college guys are immature. It's different in the real world. Got another rude awakening. It's not different. And then at some point in there, I had kids and realized that just like I didn't have any computer science experience in K-12, we still had, majority of schools in Iowa did not have computer science opportunities. And I had experienced the good and the bad, right? Like financial security, like exciting work to work on, along with environments that were not necessarily welcoming all the time. But I wanted to change both of those things and have students understand that there were careers in Iowa that had fantastic opportunities, that had like financial opportunities, but also I never felt like I would be jobless unless it was my choice, because I could always find something that I wanted to do. And if I got bored with something, I could pivot to somewhere else. And I wanted students to know about that. So when I get angry, I usually try to do something about it after throwing an adult tantrum. And so I found myself pivoting into education and figuring out how we can expose students to computer science and technology opportunities earlier, and have them see themselves in this before they start to self-select out. Because there's been tons of research that happens that, especially with girls in that age of like 9 to 13, they start seeing, oh, I don't see anyone else like me doing this. Or I've actually seen this happen where a male mentor said out loud, luckily I don't think any of the girls heard him, said, wow, I was really surprised that there were more girls engaged than the guys. Like, okay, think that in your head, but don't say it out loud, because someone's going to hear you and then start thinking, oh, I'm not supposed to be engaged. I'm not supposed to enjoy this. So try to get to them early and provide opportunities for them to see how their passions and their interests can be in a technology company, whether they're coding or whether it's something else. And so that's what I've been doing for the last several years, working with educators and training them how to teach computer science, advocating, communicating all of the opportunities right here in our state. And then also working with tech companies on how do you work with education to provide opportunities for students to see what that looks like, because also being on the other side, having a student come and job shadow and you're sitting there and you have all this great stuff happening in your head and you're coding and it's like, this looks really boring to them right now because they don't know what's going on in my head. So all of those challenges is kind of where I found myself working to bring my past career to students earlier and help support companies in Iowa.
Yeah. You know, what came to mind as I was listening to both of your stories is the obvious connection between the experience you had in high school with teachers, you know, one very supportive and encouraging, one very challenging. And I'm like you, Martina, like, tell me I can't, and I'm in, like, I'm there, like, tell me it's not possible. But it also got me thinking about Adam Grant's latest book, Think Again, and in that he talks about the educational system, and he talks about how, like, you know, one of the projects we give kindergartners is, what do you want to be when you grow up? You know, and we try to get them at, you know, 5, 6 years old to say, I'm going to be, you know, a railroad engineer in Samantha's case, you know, whatever that is, you know, that's what I'm going to be. And instead, he offers some alternatives that are some, I'm not going to be able to directly quote it, but it's basically like asking them, what are you interested in? What are you curious about? Those kinds of questions, you know, so that whereas a kindergartner might not be able to say, I want to be a software developer when I grow up, they might be able to say, I'm curious about how video games are made. You know, things like that. And so I thought it was just an interesting shift. And then I thought about, how does that apply to other adults, right? And how does that apply to older kids and all of that? And so, gosh, I mean, I don't know that either one of your stories would have been particularly different had the question been asked, you know, differently. I don't know. Like, we can't time travel and figure that out. But, you know, thinking along those lines, you know, I hear this in different segments that I tend to work in is, you know, creating space for people that are similar or different to us. So how do we, based on experiences you've had or that you wish could have been a little different, how do we create space for women in tech in a way that it doesn't feel like the minority that tends to have a negative connotation, right? And so how do we create that space? What are some of the things that we need to be sustaining or improving to create more space for more women in tech? Either one of you jump in. Martina, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. I think having a place for them at a table is really, really important.
Mm-hmm.
I coach women all the time on quit saying sorry,
Yeah.
take the seat, grab a hold of it. I also have a lot of male counterparts. I'm on quite a few boards, and I am one of the only female on most of them. However, they always say, that's weird that you get women to come to work at your place, but yet I can't even get anybody to interview. And I like, this is so obvious to me. Look around your leadership team. Are there any women on it? I mean, are they going to feel comfortable? Do they feel like they'll be heard? All of those things that are just kind of table stakes to be able to do that. And so paving the way so that they have a literal seat at the table and getting them to take advantage of that is really, really important to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's number one. Making a place, right? Making them comfortable. They have different things they care about than males and have different diversity, just like all kinds of backgrounds have different diversity, which is so important in the technical world, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I want to encourage everyone in the audience here that's listening, if you've got ideas around this question, how do we create space, more support for women in the technology field? Throw it into the chat. Samantha, how would you approach that? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say that, and this is very, very general, like broad strokes, right? Because every company has their own culture. But thinking back into my experience, it was structured more to be competitive, where you had to, like, yes, collaborate and work together, but if you wanted something, you had to go after it. But when I was hired after a hiring freeze. And so the age gap and the gender gap, I was the only female engineer on the team, and everyone else was at least 4 to 5 years older than me. I didn't know how to act in that. Like I was trained how to code and do the technical stuff, but I didn't have that training in there. And so instead of just waiting for people to take ownership of things, inviting them to. If you see someone that you want to grow internally because you're already investing in that person, invite them and say, like, I could see you doing this. And just like the high school teacher did to me, I wouldn't have had an idea of what an engineer was because I didn't have that in my bubble. But inviting and say, I think you could do this. I think maybe would you lead this team? Would you take on this bit and like help kind of groom people and build those things and help them figure out what they like and what their strengths are, and do that in front of people so that it's not just in the back room and saying like, oh, I think you should do this. And then all of a sudden you're presenting it to the team. Do that in front of people so that everyone's seeing you acknowledge them. And encouraging internally mentorship or groups, and not just segmenting, this is the women's group. Like, yes, we want to support them, but having allies, like you mentioned, like having men participate in that, so that everyone is at the table and it's not segmenting, because I got a lot of the, oh, well, you got that because you're the woman. Great, like that, it just feels yucky. And you don't feel good about any of that stuff because it diminishes a lot of the work that you do. So if you have more people at the table, like I said earlier, like, and do that inviting, I think that you can help break down some of those stereotypes, and everyone's like a team player on the same team.
Yeah. Yeah. And, allyship is one of those terms that, quickly, I think, became a buzzword in the realm of DEI. I mean, let's, and it gets thrown around a lot, but when it's always interesting to me to dig into what that really means within certain groups, right? So we tend to, when we're talking about women in fill in the blank field, we tend to automatically turn to male allyship. And so I wanted to touch on that for a moment here and think, you'd been, Martina, you had mentioned, getting people to the table. Samantha, you mentioned inviting people in. And that's, I have, my friend Glenn loves to say, lift as you climb, so it's that whole mentality, but that's not just between women and women. It's got to be cross-sectional, right? So, or intersectional, or whatever term we want to use with that. So how do we encourage men to step into that? What are the actions that men can take to embrace allyship for women in the tech field? Let's try to get as specific as we can to help some people out here.
I think that one of the number one things is ask for feedback, ask other people, talk to them. I think I coach a lot of female and male people in my environment on how do you look at something from somebody else's perspective? And that's good no matter what kind of diversity you're talking about. But really, there's behaviors that sometimes are inherent in people and they don't even know they're there. And so if you got to get very comfortable in bringing those subjects with them. I had a lead engineer on a team I was managing, and somebody came into the area and asked a question and didn't like her answer. So went to 3 other male and got them together to powwow on it. And here she's actually the lead engineer on that team. And she wanted to, and I said, you got to hit this head on, have a one-on-one with that person and say, this is what happened and how it made me feel like I wasn't the lead and I am. And maybe they just didn't even really know that's your position in that group, or maybe they just didn't realize they did it. But if you don't have, if you don't show them and give them that awareness, they never will, and they won't pass it on to anyone else. And so being very open to that, but also not, getting mad about it and, giving them a break because they probably just don't know, and gently kind of guide them through that. In my experience is probably the easiest. And absolutely has gotten over 33 years. It has gotten much easier. I'm telling you, it is nothing like it was. I had to go to the smoke room with all the guys because they all smoked when I first started and I did not smoke. But if I
Mhm.
didn't go there and have that camaraderie and become one of the crowd, they didn't want to really work with me.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I'll add on to that, like asking questions and being curious. This has come up in conversations about recruiting and retaining people, especially in a remote workforce where you can go and get paid $50,000, $100,000 more working for a company on the coast. How do we maintain people in our state? And it has to be more than just salary. You have to be able to say, what are your needs? Do you have childcare needs? Do you have schedule challenges? Are you a single parent? And this goes for anyone that can help with that. But actually understanding them as a person beyond just an employee so that you can help cater towards their needs and their interests and their desires. I know I remember being kind of chastised for not having like an outside project outside of work.
Mm.
I have a life too, and I have other interests and I have kids and all of those things. So just because I don't have, and I have a very engaged spouse, but like there's that work-life balance that I can't just dive into a project and disappear at home as well. I don't want to necessarily, but that's not a negative. And then if I'm thinking about early on, what can we do with kids? And talking about having everyone represented at the table, but maybe having like the cluster of the demographic that we're trying to help. We run Girls Who Code clubs, but they're despite the name, they're open to any student. And actually we want male mentors, we want male identifying students to participate because we want to see them to see women uplifted in coding. And so promoting opportunities. One thing that we've started doing, we have 2 young girls and our oldest loves STEM things. She goes to STEM camps and she started mentioning last summer how she's the only girl attending this. And we're like, okay, here we are. We have to deal with this. So we started inviting friends and like she picks out the camp she's interested in. And we say, what friends would you like to invite to come with you to this camp so that you're bringing your crew with you and you've got friends that that you've already coming in with it. And then even if you're the only girls there, you've at least got your 3 friends and you're not alone. So thinking about how you can do that as well so that it's not society that's pushing them out as well, because they're going to get hit over and over and over. And some people are resilient and some people are going to get tired of it and going to change paths. But how can we help them from a young age? And then also just the little comments that may not be intentional and they're just impacted by society. How do we nip those in the bud before they carry that on with them through adulthood of who can do things, who's meant to be stuff. And those are really hard because it may come from some of our biases and we have to do a lot of reflection on that. And then you have to speak up. I know that I process things. And so sometimes it takes me a bit to go, wait, did they say that? Did they mean that? And by the time it should be time for me to say something, we're already 5 things. And then the hard part for me is to go back and say, you mentioned this earlier, and I know you didn't mean it that way, but it could be read as this. So like next time, just think about that. And it's really, really hard to do that. Something that I continue to work on, but those are some of the ways that we can help with the allyship and then pointing things out in an appropriate way, in a friendly way that helps bring people along and not just create this combative environment.
Even just changing that conversation, like you mentioned earlier, I think about, I was at a conference and it was a similar situation. I think that you talked about, I think it was Money 2020, and no secret, it's a big financial thing. And probably less than 5% were females in this entire huge room in Vegas. And every time I went to somebody's booth, they said, "Oh, are you in marketing?" And I, no offense to people in marketing, but it is a female, driven occupation. So everybody's assumption. And then when they found out who I was, they almost like, whoa, sorry, I'm like, you don't have to apologize. That's a compliment. So even just reframing, I made them very aware that, they said something that was kind of counterproductive.
Yeah. So there's a great question in the chat. It says, what are some suggestions for calling out male coworkers without being a male savior or diminishing the agency of coworkers?
So one of my friends, I think she's on the call, Claire, told me to read this book, Radical Candor, because I'm very blunt and to the point, because I learned that being in a room full of guys, if I wasn't very I won't use the right word for it, but upfront, I'll call it, then I didn't know what I was talking about or anything. So I got kind of a hard exterior around me for many, many years. So she suggested I read the book Radical Candor, and and this was, I don't know, maybe a year ago, Claire. And you'd think I'd learned this by now. I know we're all still learning. And that was completely enlightening on all individuals, including males, on, making them feel like it's a trusted place to talk. You're a trusted resource. You care about them. They have feelings just like women do, even if they don't show them sometimes, but they also can connect with you that way, and definitely not in public. Pull them aside and say, hey, I know that you would have never meant to sound this way, say this, but this is kind of how I, took this, and maybe how others might. And again, it's more of enlightening them on that awareness. And then sometimes, especially if you're the leader, sometimes you have a little bit different lens that you can say, this isn't really acceptable way of communicating with this person, or, whatever it is. But I'm a huge advocate on awareness and being upfront. And if you haven't read that book, she gives tons of insight on, I read it thinking, oh my gosh, I had that exact scenario, and my communication was terrible compared to hers. So I wish I would have read that before I had it, but it really does, make you think about things a little bit different.
Yeah. And Claire very generously dropped that link to purchase in the chat. So thank you, Claire. Samantha.
Yeah, I think that it definitely depends on the power dynamics and your comfort level. So I've been in all of these different situations where I felt comfortable with the person, and I would, again, in private, just say like, hey, what you said there either made me uncomfortable, or someone else could take it this way, and clarify things for them. I've also been in situations where it would not have worked for me to directly talk with that person. And so I've gone to someone that I knew that they would listen to and said, this happened, or you were in the room, but you probably didn't catch this. Could you please talk with them? And they talk with them in private. But then I've also been in a situation where it needs to be addressed publicly, because there are some of those personalities that enable other things. And probably what I'm talking about, you've been in those meetings. And so in those cases, I would talk to someone that did have the leadership, the clout, I guess, in the room. And we kind of created like a signal where I'd like stare at them like, do you see what's happening right now? Like, this is what we were talking about, so that they could address it publicly and call it out so that everyone else could see it being shut down. And otherwise, it could be like little fires that you're constantly checking. So I think it really depends on your comfort level, how you feel in that relationship, the dynamic, and like the history of that, and making sure you're doing a good job of communicating things in factual ways, because I think sometimes women get pegged as emotional. And sometimes in those situations, you do get very emotional because it's frustrating, it's triggering, all of those things. But point out like, this is not healthy for the team, or it's not healthy for the environment. If you value me as an employee, please help me out with this specific thing, and not come in with like vague, oh, they don't like me, or those kind of things. Point them out. Those are just some tips that I've been in all of those different situations and tried different kind of ways to address them.
I want to just add something on that note about diminishing the agency of coworkers, because that is an important thing to also be aware of, is not just noticing the people who may be saying things, but also the people who you perceive may be affected. And I encourage you also to check in with them and just, hey, that really disturbed me when I saw this person say that or do that. I'm curious how you felt about it. And it doesn't mean that you should or should not say something to the person that did that. If you were uncomfortable, chances are other people were as well, or noticed it. And so at that point, I think you're flipping that away from, you can flip that away from being critical to, hey, I want to like give you this gift of feedback. I want to raise this to your attention. You can decide what you do with it, but I want to make you aware of this. And at the same time, in parallel, if you're checking in with that coworker, to just say, hey, I want to check in with you because that didn't sit right with me. I want to make sure that, how are you feeling about it? And that's how you can support that person that you think may have been diminished or minimized or impacted by somebody's thoughtless action or phrase.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go ahead.
If I can add on to that, that's really, really important to me, because I realized in my early career, I didn't advocate for myself, but the moment that I realized I needed to start advocating was when we had a female intern. And I saw the same stuff happening. And that's what lit the fire into me, because I was willing to put myself, like, diminish myself, because it's like, okay, I'll just ignore it and it'll go away or whatever. But when it happened to someone else, that was where like I couldn't take it anymore. And that's really what changed my perspective. And it's like, I need to tell these people they need to stop doing it, because it was just a culture thing, for whatever it is, that I was the only female in there. And then there was one manager who's like, why can't we ever keep women on this team? I'm like, oh, geez, you're just not aware of what's going on. But some of those things that you do need to bring up for, just the health of the company, we're more productive with different perspectives. And I think we understand that more now than ever. But at the time, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to do it, but seeing it from the other side of it happening to someone else, it gave me that perspective of like, oh, this is what I should do for them. So I wish someone would do it for me too.
Yeah. And I think promoting that behavior in others, especially male counterparts, I have had people who were fine with certain behavior until we had a female in that group. And then because their spouse, they held in such high respect that they immediately came up front and said, oh, this is, and I wasn't even aware it was happening. This is happening. And now that I think about it, oh, that could be my wife in the room. It's really bothering me, and brought it forward, and which was a good thing, but really opening that for others to feel the same too is really awesome.
One of the things, so Yelena is with us today. Hi, Yelena. And Yelena runs her Tech Collaborative, which is a group for women in the tech field, gathers the fourth Tuesday of every month. I think I'm promoting that correctly, Yelena. But why I bring that up is that the first convening of this group that she had, we had a father who was there with his daughter. And that really struck me because, his story, and I can't tell it in the way that he told it, but basically was, I am here to support my daughter. I'm here to support the women that I work with. I'm here, and it was such an action-based male allyship. To your point, like I have family members that are in this and I want to take care of them. I want to support spaces that they feel safe in and feel wanted, and that they have potential and all those things that we crave. And so that I remember that every time I start to get into any kind of discussion around women in tech, is I remember him. He will forever be burned into my memory because of that. And I thought that was a really special thing.
That is cool.
Yeah. So we notice, y'all, like people notice when you do these things, they're not for nothing. So we tend to talk about groups of people in these really large buckets, right? So like women in tech is in and of itself, that's not the right word, but let's be dramatic, a hugely diverse, set of individuals from age, race, ethnicity, that socioeconomic background. We can intersect women in tech the same way we can intersect humanity as a whole. So, when we talk about making space for women in tech, it's, we can easily go to a paradigm of white women, but there's a whole other makeup, of all of that other diversity I just spoke about. How do we in this field kind of account for that? And so I'm a woman and I'm also all of these other things. And if I show up at a company and all I see, are people who do not look like me, regardless of gender, how do we create welcoming environments for now all of those different intersections? Any thoughts on that one? And everybody, please keep putting thoughts, comments, questions in the chat, because they're great. And I hope y'all have your chat up and are reading these as well.
Man, you want to talk first?
I can give it a shot. Yeah.
This is a hard question. This is a hard question.
I'm going to see how
I know you are not expert in this. So yeah.
So I'll say one area that I have found collaboration in is outside of companies, in like Slack groups that are women, like global women in tech. And there's one that I'm in that's like specifically women with children. And a lot of them are maybe going back from staying at home, or they're trying to start a new career. And so they're going through boot camps, or they're trying to self-teach and things like that. And so a lot of what I'm thinking of and what I enjoy about that space is maybe something that could be replicated in companies and things we can do there where, we share what companies are friendly for women or friendly for parents of kids, young kids that need flexibility. We do sometimes these things like we extract women from toxic environments within a company that might be teams, right? Like people talk and maybe there are teams that the dynamics are more friendly or they're more flexible or whatever that is. And I think from a leadership position, starting to identify that because we want that across teams and the cultures again within teams look different, but pulling out what's working in some of those situations and trying to help foster that in other areas or get rid of like some toxic behaviors in teams if that's a problem. So I really think that some of that comes from leadership being engaged and aware of that. And not putting the burden on someone bringing that up because this, there's top down, there's bottom up, and we have to be looking for things in addition to hoping that people come and talk with us about stuff. So I don't know, I'll throw that as my stab trying to address it.
I think having efforts focused around it is really, really important. I mean, a lot of I read some article and I can't state the exact percentages, but of companies who have diversity and inclusion efforts compared to, I don't know, 5 years ago, and the numbers were off the charts because people are at least knowing that it's an important element and really understanding what that means. And I think it's kind of, at least it has been in my world, a trickle down effect of diversity. Once you start having diversity, people start to be aware that it exists and that you're open to it. And being really open, we had Tracy on my team actually was on the group that did it, some bias training, which is a really hard thing to talk about at work and really complicated. We didn't have everybody in the company participate like we would have loved to, but we had a group. And so now we know that we can do it again and maybe get that group a little larger and more interested and kind of keep that same that same thing going through. And I try to address it even in an interview process, not necessarily say, hey, we have this, but what's important to you in a company and what would you want to be involved in? And then I can say, oh, well, that's maybe some parallels to some of these things we have in place already, or we would love to have somebody come and bring some of those things to the table and really being open. And I think when people start to I just think it's amazing how much more open people are to these kind of concepts, and to be able to talk about them and talk openly about them is amazing. And because what's really hard is we all have biases and you cannot lead without some kind of bias. We're human, we can't do it. So people making us aware of those is really important and helping us understand.
Yeah.
I think maybe just along with that, being open and especially if you're in a leadership position, multiple times publicly saying, I know that I'm not perfect, so please call me out. And whether you're comfortable doing that in private or, appropriately in the moment, and opening that conversation up, that I think that goes a long way to show that you're at least willing to talk. And so if someone does feel uncomfortable, they're more likely to share that and change it, because we all fail all the time. That's how we learn. But if we don't embrace that and show willingness to change, then that's where we start to have assumptions on the other end of like, oh, they did that, they certainly know what they just did, they certainly meant that, to make me feel bad, which maybe they were just making an honest mistake. So it goes from both ends. But I think inviting that from a position of power is something that we can also do to help diminish that and to change any culture problems.
Absolutely.
And don't you think it's important also to allow people to recover from those things? Societally, I feel like we've become very unforgiving. If you've said something wrong one time, even if you apologize for it and recognize your mistake and take different action and, do everything you can to make restitution, there's still a barrier that's placed, a judgment that you'll wear around like a scarlet letter almost. And so, as an organization, if you're in that organization, allowing people, once they know better, to do better. Like we also have to allow that. We can't just know better and do better. We have to allow that for others, is my sense. And so that's equity, right? If I'm going to expect you to do better, I have to let you do better. So I watched some sort of TED talk the other day about that idea, and it really stuck with me in terms of this. We want to have a learning environment. We want to have a growth environment. I really like what was shared about leadership buy-in. We've got to have that leadership buy-in, that example that is set, the support that is given, all of that. But we've also got to be able to receive that. We've also got to be able to allow that and allow it to grow. Because we all know that simply saying, hey, we're going to do DEI doesn't mean we're doing DEI. It's a journey and we've got to work toward it. We've got to keep moving.
Yeah, you're never going to be perfect at it.
No.
Continual work.
Yeah. So one thing that came up recently as well in one of the discussions that we were having in the diversity committee is around, like we go to these kinds of panels, or we see organizations who are taking this stab at, hey, I recognize and own this idea of diversity. And then we show up and the panel is, Martina, you alluded to this. The panel is, 5 men and 1 woman. Woohoo, we've reached diversity, I'm not discounting by any stretch of the imagination the diversity of experience and thought that we all show up with. But when we also look at that, am I seeing myself in these realms? There's that element of tokenism that shows up a lot. And so I'm going to ask this maybe a little different than the question that I prompted you with, but I think it's still in this right vein. How do you, as women who are recognized as leaders in technology, handle those requests when you're asked to be on a panel such as this one, or any sort of other panel where you're recognizing that they're inviting me because A, I'm a woman in tech, and B, I will be the only woman on that panel? How do you all recognize those things, and how do you deal with them? How, internally, externally, how would you advise that?
I say I do have lots of friends that kind of thing makes them angry. Like they don't want to do it because that. I'm the complete opposite. I'll be on all of them because if one of us is there, it's more than none of us. Yeah. And I would probably do some dropping, like, hey, would it be nice if there's a couple more women on here, or that we had more diversity in this panel? Would have been, in a nice kind way to kind of get, some insert my jab wherever I needed to, I guess. But I would do it all the time because if we don't have women and others in diverse experience stepping up to that, then it probably won't ever happen. It will mean that people are having those things without you. So I say, go do it and be glad that you get to be the voice for the rest of us.
Yeah. Samantha, would you add anything?
I'm similar where I like to talk. So I'm happy to be on things I can, but I do try to make recommendations. One example is the Waterloo Career Center does an awesome twice a year. They do an IT career day, and they have company partners that come in and they have a panel, and then they do activities with them. And I was typically the only woman for multiple times, and I go, as if I'm available, I go both times a year. The students recognize me. I'm always coming in with something different. And so I started recommending and saying like, hey, I know this person at this company. Can you see if they're available to come? So because they're just going with the context they have, right? Like they get that one HR contact or someone from development or something like that, and then they find someone that's available. But if you can actually recommend, or you can reach out personally and say like, hey, Sherry, I think that you'd be great on this panel or something. Would you be able to come next time? Can I introduce you to this person? And I've done that in a couple of different instances if it's something that's fairly regular. If it's something that I'm not able to be on, then it's like, hey, can I make some recommendations of other people I think might be there? And kind of like that lifting other people up as well. So being able to recommend that. But yeah, I usually try to make time to do these things because I like being a part of them, and I value listening to them. I think that there's just maybe having a list of people kind of in the back of your mind, or actually making that list of people that you could recommend to kind of bring them in. And that exists in the broader world, right? There are people that say like, I want to speak or I want to start speaking. Those lists exist. And so maybe we need to have something like that within Iowa, where we can start making a list of people that we work with that we think would be great at it, and work with them on like, hey, here's a low stakes presentation thing or a co-presentation opportunity to get you kind of on the speaking, not circuit necessarily, but, you know, get you to be recognized as well, so that we can diversify opportunities within the state. But that's something that I kind of try to do personally.
Yeah.
I think there's something that we haven't talked about, but not everybody in tech is an engineer.
Mhm.
So there are lots of things revolving in involving tech. That doesn't mean you have to love developing code. That's how I got my start, of course, but that doesn't mean that it's it. So an awareness of those, you know, kind of activities that people can do at work and still be involved, especially if they love tech, but they just don't, that's not their thing to sit and code or whatever it is. So more of an awareness with that is also really important.
Love it. Yeah. Cause I mean, I have a short list of people in my mind on certain topics that I can think of. Oh, I'm going to talk about that topic. Let me call. Right. So there's, you know, which is, I think another technique for that too, is reaching out to someone else that you know is in the field and saying, do you have any suggestions? Like we all have our networks, but our networks have networks. And so if you're trying to really get some different voices, that's another kind of to extend the thought that y'all brought up there. Hey, I want to very deliberately open at this point to questions from anybody here. There has been some great comments in the chat, and I appreciate that. Does anybody else have questions or experiences on this front, or suggestions that you'd like to share? Ray, you just unmuted. Would you like to share with us?
Yeah, I'm originally from Iowa, but back in the day, I moved out east to work for General Electric in their IT department. And coming from Iowa, you know, the good old Midwest, nothing against folks on the East Coast or anybody, you know, at GE, but that was a huge eye-opening culture shock, because I mean, those people, I mean, it was a very much in your face environment. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there was a lot of productivity, but if you didn't have thick skin, it didn't matter if you were male or female, you did not do well in that environment. And so then, you know, years later, then I moved back to Iowa, and it was like a breath of fresh air coming back. Well, where am I going with this? Is, you know, now I get involved in, you know, a lot of different boards and committees at the state and national level. And so some of the folks, you know, on some of these committees and boards are from other parts of the country, you know, not good old Midwest. And again, nothing against the people, you know, that are from the coast or whatever, but sometimes I'll see some of that or pick up on some of that, you know, like what I experienced when I lived out east, because I think that, you know, there was no sugarcoating anything. I mean, it was just boom. And you know, I just seen a lot of people's feelings hurt or whatever. But so fast forward ahead to our diverse culture in today's world, with a lot of folks working remotely, and it's not just all Iowa people we're working with, or Midwest folks. So that was just kind of a point I wanted to make, that adds maybe even more, another level of complexity to the mix. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Thanks, Ray. Yelena.
So I have a question, and I already forgot the name. Ray, and then also Martina had mentioned kind of this like thick skin narrative. And, you know, I'm part of it. You know, in order to be in tech for 20 something years, you had to develop thick skin and be part of the group. But how do we change that narrative? Because, you know, I came out of a presentation last week thinking about this, you know, like none of my daughters wanted to even join anything technology related because they don't want to be the thick-skinned people. So how do we change that? I guess that's my question. I'd love to hear some ideas.
Yeah, that's a tough one, because I was definitely raised that way in my career, and honestly didn't lose some of that probably until I don't know, 3 years ago or so. And I had a really great female leader, and she I remember the first time we all sat at a table, and we were talking about some change, and she said, oh, well, how was our team going to feel about that? And I thought, who the hell cares? I mean, seriously, my mind was like, who cares? It's a business. why would we care about what people think? Because it had been ingrained in my mind for so long. And her opening that door for me, I'll forever be grateful, because then I fast forward and decided to go another avenue to a different job. And the first thing I said is questions around that. Like, I want to be in an environment where those walls are down. And so it's a huge challenge for females in this still. And it doesn't, I don't know that that's gotten better as fast as I would like it to over the years, but I think one of the things is, knocking some of those things down, especially if you're a leader like myself. I hold myself really accountable to trying to do that every day, because I got to trend this path for the next person that comes behind me. And sometimes it's not as easy. And coaching other, people on my team, that it's okay to say it, and you can say it that's why Radical Candor was so great for me, because it gave me some of those tools to really be able to do that in a way that I wouldn't have done it before, because I wasn't trained to do that. I was trained, if I yelled loud enough and I, knew what I was talking about, then they might listen. So really some of those tools, and teaching our female children how to be strong women and have it be okay.
Mm-hmm.
I come from the other side. I'm an extreme empath. And not necessarily like soft, but I definitely I like the part of tech where I understand the client, I understand the problem, and I want to solve, because I come from I want to help, I want to be the helper. And so that's where I come from. And that's where, like, in education, we do a lot about that, showing how there's lots of different opportunities in tech, and understanding your clients and empathizing with their needs and their challenges is a huge challenge. And I remember freshman year of college, we had to do like a personality test, which I have mixed feelings about those. Like, if you lean into that, that's great. But I remember, like, all of my stuff was completely different than all of the stereotypical guys in the group. And I looked at the counselor that was leading it, and I was like, I don't fit here. And she was like, we need more of you, because none of these guys understand why they're doing it. They just want to play with the tech. But they're like, playing with tech is great and that's fun. But if you don't understand what you're doing with it, that's how we end up with ethic problems. That's how we end up with things that exist that have no purpose. And so showing that those are like high needs that we have in technology is something that we can do to advocate for any age. When we're talking with students, there's a place for you in technology, because you are bringing your perspective, and you might see a problem from a different aspect, or you might have a personal problem that you want to solve. And then even in industry, that transfers into that, whether you go into marketing or sales, or you're developing code, or you're looking at it from a legal aspect, all of those things. So I think we need to do better at promoting that and showing all of the different personality traits and how they can fit into there. And that's not saying, like, I was a software developer and extreme empath, so I had to have some thick skin and like go cry in a corner at night or something if something bothered me, but then come back and like keep working at it and figure out how to kind of play the role, but then push my teammates to also see my perspective and not only live in their world. Right. And so being malleable, that I don't know how to do necessarily, because that's a very, very individual, like on your team with the people. But if you can figure out ways to work within your teams and push and say, okay, we all have this perspective, but we need to find someone that can bring in this aspect and then let them speak. I think that's one thing that we can do to bring in other traits that typically get diminished.
I think it's funny, in the tech world now, we focus so much more on UI, UX and the experience people have, and all of those things that have just made all of this so much more important to businesses, because if they don't have diversity, they don't have a great user experience, because they aren't thinking about it from all those angles, so to speak. And it is kind of pushed us into that. Now it's accelerated the need for diversity in general. It doesn't have to be gender diversity, is so extremely important in the success of what you do and what you build in products, in my opinion, that it is going to become table stakes that it has to exist.
And I think one thing that I did that did work was being able to play devil's advocate, because that kind of gets at the people that have that thick skin and that like the combative nature. And if you come with some perspective that they're not seeing at all, and like today's world, that might be accessibility, right? They're thinking about it from whatever, but they're not considering accessibility for different populations, different perspectives, users, things like that. And then they get engaged because it's like, oh, like you see a fault in me and I need to fix that type thing, but you are just actually being helpful. And so trying to play up their personalities might be helpful as well.
Well, Jeremiah, I'm sorry, we're gonna have to close. So I'm so sorry. I hate to not take all questions and comments. We only have an hour though. Is it a quick one? If we can do it quick, I'm gonna let you ask your question because I can't say no to people.
Yeah, and because this is something that can kind of be taken offline as well. What do you wish the 7th grade version of you heard? So my daughter's in 7th grade. She wants to be a programmer. I've been encouraging her in that. Her science teacher is starting them on that and has invited me to be like a professional mentor. So what are things that I can say to her and her classmates to make them feel included and make them feel like they have a seat at the table?
That they're not all nerds. My boss still sometimes will call me a nerd, and it, you know, not all of us look like nerds. Maybe show them, and that they can really they can make anything happen for themselves if they really want to. Some of those kids don't hear that from anybody, so
Yeah.
And I would say that the tech world is so diverse that there is a place for them if they want to be in it. Whatever they experience, you know, in a particular class may not be what interests them, but there is so much more in the world. And anything that they're interested in probably has a tech component. And so them picking up little bits of and pieces along the way, whatever they find that passion, there's probably technology that they can use to help solve that problem that they're passionate about. So even if they're not interested or don't feel like they're in the right place at that time, there's still a place for them somewhere.
absolutely. Good one.
That is such a great note.
One quick comment, Martina. When I moved back to Iowa, I went to work at Maytag in their IT department. Weren't you there?
I remember you, right?
Yeah. I thought, wait a minute, I know her from somewhere. All right. Many moon ago.
Connections everywhere. I love it. Well, thank you all again for being here, for supporting this effort within our state, for continuing the discussion. If you do want to continue it, next month, our Spotlight series will be on October 25th, and our moderator will be Sam Reed, who's going to be talking about hiring for diversity. He jumped right on that topic as something he was interested in and really wants to share with others. So we are working through recruiting our panelists. If you know of anybody who would be an amazing panelist for that, please email that to Molly for us, and we'll reach out to them. But hope to see you again next month. And thank you for supporting our first ever DEI Spotlight series for TAI. I really appreciate you all. And thank you especially to Martina and Samantha. Thank you both for
thank you
taking
for
the time
having me.
today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
You all go have
Thank
a
you.
great week.
You
See you
too.
next month.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jen, Martina, and Samantha, and everyone for joining. Hope to see you all next month. Have a good afternoon.
Bye.
Thank you.